Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. We're talking about a very sad story today. The story of a freshman from UNC-Chapel Hill who died earlier this year after ingesting fentanyl outside a Duke University dorm, according to papers filed in federal court. Her name was Grace Burton. Joining us to explain what happened and how light was shed on this situation is our Enterprise Team Executive Producer, Ashley Talley. Ashley, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Amanda.
So this happened in March, but we're just learning about it now. Why are we just hearing about this now?
Yes. Well, the first time I heard about it was in my inbox yesterday morning. We never like to, not get to a story first, but this is one of those stories that when I read it, I knew that the only way that it ever would have come out was because of a student journalist who dug into it. So this didn't come out originally, this overdose of a UNC-Chapel Hill student on Duke campus, because Duke said they didn't release anything about it because it was a Chapel Hill student. And UNC-Chapel Hill said, well, it happened on Duke campus and we respect families' wishes. So nobody knew about this death until a senior at Duke, her name is Charlotte Craman, had heard about it. And she'd heard about it. I interviewed her yesterday, so that's how I know all this. And she said she thought it would just naturally more information would come out. And when it didn't, she started investigating herself. And she ended up with this incredible piece in the Assembly. That's an online magazine here in North Carolina that Kyle Villeman started a year or two ago, and John Jesher, a former NNO editor, is working with him, and they do some really great journalism. And this was definitely one that I would say has reverberated across the state already. It just came out on Monday.
That's incredible. And, sometimes when we talk about a case like this, the identity of the person who died gets lost. So before we go into the details, let's just briefly touch on who this young woman was, this 19-year-old from UNC-Chapel Hill.
Yeah, definitely. Her name was Elizabeth Grace Burton. She was 19. She grew up in Charlotte. She was a freshman, and we have a couple pictures of her, and she's just lovely, like long blonde hair, looks very vivacious. Her sorority sister described her as always smiling, and one of them described her as very intentional, which I think is a great verb or a great adjective to describe somebody. She was obviously bright. She was I think what's called a Carolina Scholar, where she was guaranteed admission into the Keenan Flagler Business School. That was according to her obituary. And she seemed to have been really social too. She pledged her sorority, Zeta, in the fall, so the beginning of her freshman year. And she was already elected to an office within that. Director of Sisterhood was the office she was elected to. And so she just seems to have been very bright, vivacious, and had a lot of friends.
And active, obviously, in her campus community. Well, we're going to talk more about what happened to Grace Burton after the break. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. So there are now federal court documents filed in this case. 2 men have been charged with drug distribution related to her death. What do we know about the timeline about what happened on March 9th?
Yes, those federal court documents are a lot of how we're able to piece together this timeline. So Grace had been at a party at UNC. This was a Wednesday night. And according to the Assembly, I was not able to confirm this, but they talked with her friends. She had met a Duke student on Tinder several weeks ago, and they had just been messaging back and forth. That night, they decided to meet up and hang out for the first time. So court documents say that he came and picked her up in Chapel Hill, and they came back to the Duke campus. And around 4:30 in the morning, her phone made a text or call, I'm not sure which one, to a person that the federal court documents identified as this man named Kai Frazier, known as the barber by many people. They had records of many text messages back and forth with him and the Duke student who she was with, Patrick Rowland. But apparently she was the one who contacted Frazier that night and to buy cocaine. He came to the dorm. There is surveillance video that investigators saw where they see this RAV4 pull up that they say has been connected with Frazier and other stings. They had actually just done a sting operation on him on February 23rd.
So he
just
was known to them.
Before. He
Yeah.
was known to them in multiple counties, Orange County, Durham County, and the DEA was helping with all this. So 4:30, he pulls up. Grace and Patrick get in the car briefly, and then they get out. 5:30 or 5:40 a.m., Patrick makes another call to Frazier's cell phone. This is the barber's cell phone. So he's calling the alleged drug provider again. And apparently in that call, he told investigators that she was wobbly on her feet, and that she had fallen asleep after they had taken the drugs. And I think, cocaine is an upper, it's not something where people typically fall asleep.
And I think it's important to point out here that nobody in this situation and in many situations, people don't believe they're buying fentanyl. They believe they are buying another drug,
absolutely,
like cocaine, and the drug is laced with fentanyl.
And obviously at this point, I don't, who knows what they knew, but Patrick didn't seem to come to that conclusion because he called Frazier's number back, according to court documents. And the next thing surveillance video shows is Frazier's vehicle coming back to that dorm. That's Kilgo dorm, residence hall on the Duke campus. There's actually video of Frazier carrying Grace Burton up the stairwell of inside this dorm room to ostensibly what we believe is Patrick Rowland's dorm room, though it wasn't specific about that in the court documents. So that's 5:40 a.m. They had been outside, hanging out outside the residence hall.
So eventually, I'm assuming 911 was called, correct?
Eventually, and I don't know who called it at this point. The assembly did say that Patrick went down to a neighboring student's room, knocked on the door, and either asked him to call or said, something was wrong. So that was 5:40 that the surveillance video showed Grace being taken into the room. It's 6:25 a.m. when emergency medical technicians arrive at that dorm room and start to work on Grace. And at that point, she's unconscious. The assembly described her as being pale and clammy in a puffy jacket lying on the bed with a trash can beside her. So it's unclear at what point 911 was called, who called it exactly, but what's clear is the drugs that Grace Burton had taken had affected her. Sadly, 2 days later, she died in the hospital. The court records show that there was little bringing activity, but her obituary says in one of her last acts of kindness that she was able to donate her organs. So her family was, proud of that.
And, you touched on this briefly, and we mentioned this at the top. So Patrick Rowland and the man known as the barber were charged with distributing drugs. But the barber was known. He had been involved in a sting with the Orange County Sheriff's Department where they had done a buy with him, correct? So they were watching him.
Yeah, they had used an undercover informant to do a buy with him. Then they had actually gone to his barber shop and seen his girlfriend pull up there and seen him come out with a backpack. So yeah, he was definitely known to them. He's also been convicted in the past. I think in 2015 for some drug related charges, and I believe spent some time in prison, not very long. But, yes, he was definitely known to authorities.
And then amazingly, once this starts to become, an investigation, a death investigation, they then hear from Raleigh police who say, oh, yeah, we had a death the day after Grace Burton's death that we think is linked to the same guy. Tell me about that.
Yes. So this DEA agent who is kind of working on this case had been in touch with Duke police about the, what happened on campus there. Around the same time, they got a call from Raleigh police. So Grace took the drugs on March 9th. Another man, Joshua Zinner is his name. He was living in Raleigh. He had gone to UNC Wilmington, took the drugs and was found in his room dead. And they tested the bags that were around Zinner and found that they were a mixture of cocaine and fentanyl. And they found a what they described as like a miniature Ziploc bag with white powder in it inside Grace's phone case, it sounded like, and they tested that, and it tested positive also for cocaine and fentanyl.
And what's really unbelievable about this is neither university has spoken about this, but we've come to find out that there have been other fentanyl deaths of students in the past year that haven't been reported as well. So I guess it's really hard to shed light on a problem if no one's talking about it. And that seems to be the case here.
So it's really interesting. There is a man named Dean Blackburn who is head of the wellness program at UNC, and he made a presentation back over the summer to a strategic initiatives committee. And so they said, due to the nature of Dean's job, he's well connected in the substance use recovery community, and basically said he had gotten that information through his personal life. And then they wrote, this is not an accounting on behalf of the university, as the university does not track student deaths or causes of death. And so basically they're like, we don't know how many students have died of fentanyl poisoning or overdoses. It's just in the interview I did with Charlotte Craman, she talked about how neither university wanted to talk about this. They're worried about their reputations, understandable, but to not come out in something that Charlotte described as sort of ubiquitous in the party culture and the fraternity and sorority culture in most universities, and particularly Chapel Hill and at Duke too. It seems like it needs to be addressed. And I want to tell you one really super weird and interesting thing that came about while I was reporting on this yesterday. The barber whom we've talked about,
yes.
Kai Fraser is his name. I started Googling him just to kind of figure out more about him. And one of the first links I came up with was a WRAL article from 2020. Back then, it was around Christmas time. He had been to GameStop to buy, he said he was buying his son a video game, and there was a long line. And the security guard told him, go ahead, I'll, just give me some money and I'll save your place in line. And he went back to realize it was all a scam. There was no security guard. He called Sarah Kruger to talk about this, and she actually interviewed him in 2020 in his barbershop in his barber chair.
On a totally different topic, obviously.
On a totally different topic, not related to this at all, but that is how we have video
of him.
Of this man, because in federal court there are no mugshots. So
right.
It was just a really sort of ironic, odd twist
situation
of events that Sarah had met him before. And one other thing is, I said, Sarah, they have a number in the federal court documents, just to make sure this is the same guy. Do you still have a number that you called him on? And she did, and we checked it. It was the same number. It was definitely him.
That is a really strange twist there. Absolutely.
It really was.
Well, Ashley, thank you so much for sharing this really important story with us and shedding light on it. And hopefully it's going to create some awareness going forward.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I definitely hope that this is definitely something we'll keep doing and looking at.
Absolutely. This has been the WRAL Daily Download, a production of WRAL News. Check out our new true crime podcast from WRAL Studios, The Killing Month, August 1978. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. As always, thanks for listening.